It was the first week of December, and the air was crisp with the sharp, icy breath of winter. Snowflakes swirled outside the frosted window panes, clinging to the edges before melting into tiny droplets, as if even nature couldn't decide whether to stay or leave. Inside the cozy yet tense living room of the Thompson house, 12-year-old Jake sat on the couch, his fingers nervously tracing the seams of his worn-out jeans. He had always loved Christmas, the twinkling lights, the scent of pine needles, the way the whole world seemed to soften under a blanket of snow. But this year, something felt wrong. His mother, Linda, stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed tightly over her chest like she was holding herself together. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her eyes, usually warm, usually kind, were cold and distant. Beside her stood Greg, her new husband, a man with a sharp jawline and an even sharper tone. He drummed his fingers against the mantelpiece, the sound like tiny, impatient hammers. Jake's little sister, Emma, hovered near the Christmas tree, her small hands clutching the hem of her sweater. She kept glancing at Jake, her big eyes filled with something between guilt and fear. Then, without warning, Linda spoke. "We all agreed you're not welcome at Christmas this year." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, thick and suffocating. Jake blinked, certain he had misheard. But the silence that followed was deafening. No laughter. No "just kidding." No warm hug to soften the blow. Just the quiet crackle of the fire and the slow, sinking realization that this was real. "What?" Jake's voice was small, barely more than a whisper. Greg sighed, as if explaining something to a particularly slow child. "You're messy. You leave your things everywhere. Last year, you knocked over the tree. The year before that, you spilled hot cocoa on the new rug. You just ruined things, Jake." Linda nodded, her expression hardening. "It's not personal. It's just easier this way." Easier for who? Jake wanted to scream, but the lump in his throat was too big, too painful. He looked at Emma, hoping for some kind of defense, but she just bit her lip and looked away. What they didn't know, what they had never known, was that Jake had been paying the mortgage on this house for the past year. His late father, before he passed, had left him a small trust fund, just enough to help out. Every month, like clockwork, Jake quietly transferred the money, never asking for thanks, never expecting praise. He did it because it was family, because that's what you do for the people you love. But now, as he sat there, staring at the faces of the people who had just told him he wasn't wanted, something inside him shifted. A quiet, simmering anger. A resolve. If he wasn't family at Christmas, then maybe he wasn't family at all. And if that was true, then why should he keep paying for a home he wasn't welcome in? The snow kept falling outside. The fire kept crackling. And Jake made a decision. The days after that's how Jake had started thinking of it, like some terrible royal decree passed in a blur of hollow footsteps and muffled voices. The house, once filled with the usual sounds of life, Emma's giggles, the clatter of dishes, the hum of the TV, now felt like a museum, cold and eerily quiet, as if everyone was tiptoeing around an invisible bomb. Jake moved through it like a ghost, unseen, unheard, his presence reduced to nothing more than an inconvenience. Linda and Greg acted as if nothing had changed, as if banishing him from Christmas was as normal as hanging stockings or setting out milk for Santa. They laughed over dinner, made plans for the holiday, even hummed carols under their breath, all while Jake sat at the far end of the table, pushing food around his plate, his stomach too twisted with hurt to eat. Emma at least seemed uneasy. She'd sneak him extra cookies when no one was looking or bump her knee against his under the table, a silent "I'm sorry." But she never spoke up. Not really. And that stung almost as much as the betrayal itself. Then came the night everything changed. It was late, so late that the moon hung heavy in the sky, casting long, skeletal shadows across Jake's bedroom floor. He couldn't sleep. His mind kept replaying Linda's words, Greg's dismissive shrug, the way they'd all agreed like he was some problem to be voted on and discarded. His chest burned with a mix of anger and something deeper, something raw, unwanted. That's when he remembered the box. Tucked under his bed, hidden beneath a stack of old notebooks, was a small wooden chest his dad had given him years ago. Inside were the last pieces of him photos, a worn-out baseball glove, a pocket watch that no longer worked. And at the very bottom, beneath it all, a folded piece of paper. Jake's fingers trembled as he pulled it out, the edges soft from years of being handled. His father's handwriting, bold and steady, stared back at him.
Jake.
Life won't always be fair. People will hurt you, even the ones who are supposed to love you. But remember, you don't have to let them. Stand up for yourself, even if it's scary, even if it's hard. Love, Dad. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His eyes stung, but he refused to cry. Not again, because his dad was right. He didn't have to take this. A plan began to form in his mind, sharp and clear. The mortgage. Every month, like clockwork, he'd been transferring money from his trust fund to Linda's account, paying for the roof over their heads. Their roof. The roof they decided he didn't deserve to be under at Christmas.
Well,
if he wasn't family enough to celebrate with them, then maybe he wasn't family enough to pay for their home either. The next morning, Jake woke up with a resolve so fierce it scared him a little. He waited until Linda and Greg left for work, until Emma was bundled off to school. Then, with steady hands, he logged into the bank account on his laptop, the one he'd secretly been using for the transfers. The screen glowed in the dim light of his room, numbers and buttons staring back at him. One click. That's all it would take. His finger hovered over the mouse. And then,
click.
The payment was canceled.
Just like that.
A strange calm settled over him. No going back now. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the window pane. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Life went on. But Jake had just changed everything. Weeks passed in a slow, simmering silence. The house felt different, now not just quiet, but charged, like the air before a storm. Jake moved through his days carefully, watching, waiting. He half expected Linda or Greg to notice right away, to burst into his room demanding to know why the mortgage hadn't been paid. But they didn't. Life carried on as if nothing had changed, and that, more than anything, proved how little they truly paid attention. Then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the letter arrived. Jake saw it first. He'd been grabbing a snack from the kitchen when he spotted the envelope on the counter, its crisp white paper standing out against the clutter of bills and grocery lists. The bank's logo was stamped in the corner, bold and official. His stomach twisted. He knew what it was before he even touched it. He should have left it there. Should have let them find it on their own. But something, curiosity, maybe, or the need to see the moment his plan began to unfold, made him pick it up. The paper was smooth under his fingers, the kind of expensive stock that only came with bad news. He didn't open it. He didn't have to. The words "Final Notice" were printed in thick black letters right above Linda's name. A thrill shot through him, sharp and bright. This was really happening. He placed the letter back exactly where he'd found it, then retreated to his room, leaving the door cracked just enough to hear. It didn't take long. The front door slammed open, Linda's heels clicking against the hardwood in quick, angry strides. Greg. Her voice was shrill, panicked. Greg, get in here. Jake held his breath. Footsteps thundered down the hall, followed by Greg's gruff. What? I'm in the middle of. Look at this. Paper rustled, then silence.
A beat. 2.
This has to be a mistake, Greg muttered, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. A mistake? They're threatening to foreclose, Greg. How is that a mistake? Linda's words came out in a rush, her breath uneven. We paid this month, didn't we? I thought. I told you to check the account. Greg snapped. Well, I did. Or I thought I did. I don't know. I've been busy with. Busy with what? This is the house, Linda. Their voices rose, sharp and frantic, bouncing off the walls. Jake pressed his back against his bedroom door, his heart pounding so hard he was sure they could hear it. He'd imagined this moment 100 times, but hearing it was different. The fear in Linda's voice. The way Greg's anger wavered, just for a second, into something like fear. Then, suddenly, a new sound. A small, hesitant knock at his door. Jake froze. Jake. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. Are you okay? He didn't answer.
Couldn't.
Outside, the argument raged on. We need to call the bank, Linda was saying, her voice thin with desperation. There's still time. We can fix this. With what money, Linda? Greg's voice was a growl. You spent the savings. A pause. Then, quieter, Linda's reply. We'll figure it out. Jake exhaled, long and slow. They had no idea. No idea the money had been coming from him all along. No idea he'd been the one keeping them afloat.
And now?
Now they were drowning. And Jake? Jake wasn't throwing them a lifeline. Not this time. The house had become a battlefield. Every conversation between Linda and Greg was now laced with tension, their words barbed and brittle. The once cozy living room felt like a war zone, with hushed arguments erupting over bills, over bank statements, over the looming threat of foreclosure that hung over them like a storm cloud. Jake watched it all unfold from the sidelines, his silence a weapon sharper than any words. Emma knew something was wrong. She'd always been perceptive, her big eyes missing nothing. She'd cornered Jake in the hallway after school one day, her small hands gripping the straps of her backpack like she was afraid he'd vanish if she let go. Why are they so mad? She'd whispered. Jake had just shrugged. They'll figure it out. But the truth was he was starting to wonder if they could. Then came the night everything shattered. It was dinner, or what passed for dinner now, with Linda picking at her food and Greg scowling at his phone, the table silent except for the clink of silverware. The bank had called again that afternoon. Jake had heard Linda's voice through the door, pleading, bargaining, her tone fraying at the edges. We just need more time. No, I understand, but please. Now, as Greg slammed his phone down with a snarl, the tension in the room snapped. That's it, he growled. They're not budging. We have 2 weeks to come up with a payment, or we're done. Linda's face paled. 2 weeks? Greg, we can't. Well, we'd better find a way. Greg's fist hit the table, making the plates jump. Emma flinched. Because I am not losing this house over some bureaucratic screw-up. Jake kept his eyes on his plate, but he could feel at the weight of the moment, the crack in their perfect little world. This was it. His chance. He took a slow breath. It's not a screw-up. The words cut through the room like a knife. Silence. Linda blinked. What? Jake looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time in weeks. The mortgage. It's not a mistake. He kept his voice steady, calm. I stopped paying it. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. Then, you what? Linda's voice was a whisper, disbelieving. Greg's chair screeched as he stood. What the hell are you talking about? Jake didn't flinch. The money for the house. It was coming from me. From Dad's trust. I've been paying it for a year. He let that sink in, watching the confusion twist into shock on their faces. But after you told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas, I figured why should I pay for a home I'm not even allowed to be in? The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's mouth opened, then closed. Greg's face darkened, his hands curling into fists. Emma just stared, her eyes wide. Then, you little brat. Greg lunged forward, but Linda caught his arm, her grip tight. Greg, stop. He's been sabotaging us. Greg spat. You hear that, Linda? Your son is throwing us out on the street. Linda's eyes were locked on Jake, her expression unreadable. Is this true? Jake held her gaze. Yeah, it's true. The admission hung in the air, heavy and final. For the first time, Linda looked small. Lost. Jake, she started, her voice cracking. We didn't know. That's the point, Jake said quietly. You never even noticed. And with that, he pushed back from the table, leaving his half-finished dinner behind. The house was silent as he walked away. But for the first time in weeks, Jake didn't feel like a ghost. He felt seen. And that was enough. Days after Jake's revelation passed in a suffocating silence, thicker than the winter FO outside. The house, once filled with tense arguments, had become a mausoleum of unspoken words and stolen glances. Linda moved through the rooms like a shadow, her usual sharpness dulled by something Jake had never seen in her before: doubt. Greg's anger had hardened into a cold, simmering resentment, his glares like physical blows whenever Jake entered a room. Only Emma still sought him out, slipping notes under his door or leaving his favorite snacks on his desk when no one was looking. Jake had expected fury, screaming matches, punishments. But this quiet devastation was worse. Then came the phone call. Jake was in his room, pretending to do homework, when he heard Linda's voice rise in desperation from the kitchen. "Please, Martha, I know it's last minute, but we're family." A pause. Jake held his breath. "No, I understand. Of course." Linda's voice cracked.
Yes. Goodbye.
The receiver clicked back into place with a finality that echoed through the house. Jake crept to the hallway, peering around the corner just in time to see Linda slump into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Greg stood over her, his usual bluster gone, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. "She said no?" Greg asked, though they both knew the answer. Linda nodded without looking up. She said she's not bailing us out again. Not after last time." Damn it. Greg's fist hit the counter, but there was no real force behind it. Just defeat. "What about your brother?" "You know David won't lend us a dime," Linda whispered. Jake felt something twist in his chest. He'd never seen his mother like this, small, vulnerable. "Human." Greg ran a hand through his hair. "So, what now?" "We just lose everything." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jake retreated to his room, his earlier satisfaction curdling into something bitter. He'd wanted them to feel his pain, to understand what it was like to be cast aside. But watching Linda's shoulders shake with silent sobs, hearing Greg's voice break, it didn't feel like victory. That night, as a freezing rain tapped against his window, Jake lay awake staring at the ceiling. His father's letter sat heavy on his nightstand. "Stand up for yourself," it said. But his father had never told him what to do when standing up for yourself meant watching your family crumble. Down the hall, hushed voices argued. "We could sell the car. That wouldn't cover half of what we owe." "Then what, Greg? What's your brilliant plan?" A long silence. Then, so quiet Jake barely caught it. Maybe we were too hard on him." Jake's breath caught. "Oh, now you admit it?" Greg's laugh was harsh. "After we're about to lose everything. Linda's voice broke. "I never thought he'd what?"
Fight back.
Another silence. Then the sound of a door slamming. Jake rolled over, pressing his face into his pillow. Outside, the rain turned to sleet, pelting the roof like 1,000 tiny accusations. He'd gotten exactly what he wanted. So, why did it feel like he'd lost? Christmas Eve dawned brittle and bright, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made the whole world feel fragile. Jake woke to the sound of hushed voices downstairs, not the usual tense whispers, but something quieter, something raw. He crept down the stairs, his socks silent on the hardwood, and found Linda sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at an envelope in her hands. The bank's logo glared up from the corner, the words "Final Notice" stamped across the front in angry red ink. Her shoulders were hunched, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced the edge of the paper. For the first time, Jake really looked at her. The dark circles under her eyes. The way her sweater hung loose on her frame, like she'd forgotten to eat. This wasn't a sharp, unshakable woman who had told him he wasn't welcome. This was someone broken. And it was his fault. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. A floorboard creaked behind him. Jake turned to find Emma standing there, clutching her stuffed reindeer to her chest, her eyes wide and wet. "Are we really gonna lose the house?" she whispered. Jake opened his mouth, but no words came out.
"Then, no."
Linda's voice was hoarse but firm. She hadn't turned around, but her grip on the envelope tightened. "We're not." Jake frowned.
"How?"
Linda finally turned to look at him, and what Jake saw in her eyes made his breath catch. Not anger.
Not blame.
Just regret. "Because I'm going to fix this," she said quietly. "Starting with you." She stood, the chair scraping against the floor, and crossed the room until she was right in front of him. For a long moment, she just looked at him, her face pale in the winter light. Then, slowly, she reached out and cupped his cheek, her thumb brushing away a tear Jake hadn't even realized had fallen. "I was wrong," she whispered. "About everything." The words hung in the air between them, fragile as the icicles outside. Jake's chest ached. "Why now?" Linda's hand dropped, but her gaze didn't waver. "Because I finally saw what I was losing." And just like that, something inside Jake cracked. All the anger, all the hurt. It didn't vanish, but it shifted, softened at the edges. Outside, snow began to fall, silent and steady, blanketing the world in white. And for the first time in months, Jake felt something like hope. The fireplace crackled softly, casting flickering golden light across the living room where the Christmas tree stood, not the towering, perfectly decorated centerpiece of years past, but a smaller, slightly lopsided fir that Emma had insisted on choosing. Its branches drooped under the weight of handmade ornaments and tinsel applied with more enthusiasm than precision. The air smelled of cinnamon and pine, of sugar cookies slightly too brown at the edges, of the peppermint hot chocolate steaming in mismatched mugs on the coffee table. Jake sat on the floor beside the tree, watching as Emma excitedly tore into her last present, a small box containing the silver charm bracelet she'd been eyeing for months. Her gasp of delight was louder than the carols playing quietly from the radio. Across from them, Linda and Greg sat together on the couch, not quite touching, but not stiff with tension anymore either. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. The mortgage had been paid, not by Jake this time, but by the combined efforts of Linda picking up extra shifts and Greg finally selling his prized guitar collection. They'd made the deadline with hours to spare. Jake had watched from his bedroom window as Linda returned from the bank, her shoulders lighter than they'd been in weeks. She'd looked up, caught him watching, and offered a small, hesitant smile. He'd smiled back. Now, as Emma proudly showed off her bracelet to anyone who would look, Greg cleared his throat awkwardly. "Jake," he began, then stopped, rubbing the back of his neck. I got you something too. It's not much, but..." He reached behind a couch and pulled out a flat, rectangular package wrapped in slightly crumpled paper. Jake took it, surprised by the weight of it. He peeled back the paper to reveal a framed photo, one he'd never seen before. It showed his dad, younger and grinning, his arms slung around a teenage Linda, both of them laughing at something off-camera. At the bottom, in his dad's familiar handwriting, were the words, "Family isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." Jake's throat tightened. "Found it in an old box," Greg muttered, not meeting his eyes. "Thought you might like it." Jake looked at him, really looked, and saw the apology in the set of his shoulders, the regret in the way his fingers tapped nervously against his knee. "Thanks," Jake said quietly. And for the first time, he meant it. Linda reached over then, her hand covering Jake's. "We have a lot to make up for," she said softly. "But we're going to try, if you'll let us." Outside, snow continued to fall, wrapping the world in quiet. The fire crackled. Emma hummed along to the radio. And Jake realized something then, as he looked around at their imperfect, mended little family. Revenge had felt good for a while. But this was better. And just like that, dear reader, our story comes to an end, but the journey doesn't have to stop here. If you felt the sting of unfairness like Jake, or cheered when he found his strength, or smiled as the snow fell on their imperfect but healing Christmas, then you understand what makes stories like this so special. They remind us that even in the coldest winters, warmth can be found, that mistakes can be mended, that family, whether by blood or by choice, is worth fighting for. So if this tale has touched you, if you've ever needed a reminder that you deserve to be seen, to be valued, to belong, then don't let the magic end here. Subscribe for more stories where the underdogs rise, where wounds heal stronger than before, and where every ending carries the promise of a new beginning. Because everyone deserves a story where they're the hero, especially you. Hit that subscribe button, and let's keep turning pages together. The next adventure is just waiting to begin.